name is Emily Kennedy, and for the past 4 years, I've dedicated my life to combating human trafficking. And I didn't have to go abroad to do it. I didn't have to go to another country. I focused right here in Pittsburgh. I was the first to pioneer technology solutions for law enforcement at Carnegie Mellon University, starting with my senior honors thesis in 2011. And that project was further fostered at the Carnegie Mellon Auton Lab, which is in the Robotics Institute. So it's a great place where we use artificial intelligence for social impact. And when I started looking into this issue, I found out that it's a much bigger problem here at home than we originally thought. So every year, there are millions of ads online selling sex. And behind many of these ads are victims of human trafficking. And there are thousands in our neighborhoods of Pittsburgh every day. And we even put up a test ad recently to get a pulse on the demand side, and that ad received over 200 unique responses, some of whom were looking specifically for minors. This is not okay, and this is an epidemic in our community and in our country. But another problem with this is that when law enforcement tries to use this information, they're just overwhelmed by the fire hose of information that they're getting. So it's very difficult to use, until now. At Marinus Analytics, we solve this problem. So we use machine learning to find useful patterns to turn all of this data, this huge amount of data, into actionable intelligence for the social worker, the detective, and the public servant. And so this enables them, with respect to their search for these victims, to follow up on leads more quickly, find more victims in less time, especially in these cases where timing is crucial and things can happen so quickly, and also point their attention to those highest value criminal targets, like groups trafficking many girls at once. And this, unfortunately, is an all too common scenario, and I want to tell you about one of these stories. We had a victim, and her name was Sarah. And as the typical case in the US goes, a lot of people, think trafficking happens outside of the country, but it actually happens here. And one of the typical cases we see is one like Sarah's. She's 15 years old, and she's a foster child. And she had gone from home to home, but she never really found a safe place. And so one day she ran away. And she was taken in by this guy named Mike. He offered her what she needed at that moment: food, shelter, the affection that she had been craving. But soon enough, he told her that she needed to carry her weight. What Sarah didn't know is that Mike was a manipulative and violent pimp, and he had done this many times, and he knew what he was doing. He sold her and a number of other girls online for sex, and each girl had to be with 8 to 10 men per night to meet his $1,000 per night quota. He'd basically say, if you don't bring back $1,000, then don't come back. And from this process, he made over hundreds of thousands of dollars a year off of these girls. And not only that, he was really smart at evading law enforcement, and he had been running for a number of years from law enforcement. For instance, he would change the phone numbers used to advertise the girls, and that would tend to throw off the detectives and the social workers looking for their girls. Despite the complication of this situation, in our software, we were able to track him. So I'm going to show you what we found in our software. Here you'll see a travel pattern going back 6 months where they started in Texas and ended up in our area. And the graph on the right, each color represents a different burn phone used by this group over time to evade law enforcement. And so in typical cases where detectives would spend hours on Google searches trying to identify, for instance, the string of burn phones and the pattern of travel of this group as they pass in and out of Pittsburgh or your city, we were able to identify this travel pattern and uncover these phone numbers just in a number of seconds. I would say under a minute. And so all of this information empowered the detectives to make the arrest and help the victims as well. And so the goal here is that we're not just getting the low-hanging fruit, the guys who are easy to get and the guys who are not as smart about it, but we also want to get the guys like Mike, who are evasive, who exploit a larger number of victims. And this evidence is crucial to linking these perpetrators to their crimes instead of having the victim take the fall for them, and breaking the cycle of exploitation so that it stops. In this way, we've aided in the rescue of over 120 victims of human trafficking. And many of our detective users are not at liberty to tell us about our successes, so we believe that this number is even larger. And from what our detectives tell us, we also believe that many victims are still out there waiting to be rescued, and we believe we can put this number into the thousands. Our users come from different levels of law enforcement, local, state, and federal, from over 20 states and provinces. And in addition to law enforcement and prosecutors, we also empower nonprofits who work with victims to keep track of and find their girls. Courage House is one such organization. They're a safe house for victims. And it's really important that they have our software because they need to keep track of their victims when these girls recidivate. So it's important that the service provider be in touch with the victim when the girl returns to her pimp, which happens often. And that means that the provider is in touch with the victim when, inevitably, the pimp beats her up and she reaches out and wants someone to call for help. And so this ability to track these people is really helpful to our nonprofits to keep track of their victims and to continue to be there for them during the healing process and that journey. And so in addition to that, our nonprofits work with law enforcement, and so the leads that they generate through our software are often passed on to law enforcement. So that's another part of our mission, is to foster that collaboration between nonprofits and public safety organizations. So we are empowering these public and nonprofit agencies to take better care of the vulnerable in our community. And this is just a small sampling. We also help a number of nonprofits that support law enforcement more directly. One example would be the Pittsburgh-based National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, which is like an intelligence center that supports law enforcement. And we also work with the Pittsburgh Coalition to End Human Trafficking, which is a great organization. More recently, we're working with International Justice Mission. They're an organization that helps rescue and advocate for the rights of victims of human trafficking across the world. And we're working with them to deploy our software in Southeast Asia. We find that across the board, they're experiencing very similar problems to what we see in the US. Pittsburgh FBI was one of our first users of our research-grade software, and they use it to this day. And so they've been a great partnership that we've had, along with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which uses our tool daily to pass on leads to law enforcement. We also have ongoing work with Department of Justice along the same lines, and we have ongoing research with Carnegie Mellon, as well as the DARPA MEMEX program. So the point of that is that we need ongoing research to keep ahead of these criminal behaviors as they continue to evolve. Going forward, we're always looking to develop new ways to increase this collaboration between public agencies and nonprofits. And so one example would be that we empower the nonprofits to uncover tips that they send to law enforcement conducts the rescue, and then law enforcement can point the victims back to the nonprofits where they can receive the care that they need. So what we do really strengthens the net so that law enforcement and nonprofits can keep victims from falling through the cracks in this cycle. So where do you all come in? I've always believed that human trafficking is such a complex issue that it really needs people from about 1 million different angles working on this problem. But it all starts with personal awareness. So if I had never learned about this, that sex trafficking existed back in junior high, I would not be standing in front of you right now. There are a lot of great resources. You can check out our website at marinusanalytics.com. And another great one with some general human trafficking resources would be endhumantrafficking.org, and that's supported by the Pittsburgh Coalition. And I know that they're also always looking for volunteers from they have a number of different projects to work on, and so they would love anyone who's looking to get involved in the local community. Please talk to them. And I believe that really anyone can contribute to a solution to this problem. So for instance, maybe it could be even related to your current job. If you happen to work in an airport, learn the signs of human trafficking. If you go to hotels often on business trips, learn what human trafficking looks like so that you can report it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That's where a lot of law enforcement even get their tips. If you work with foster children or even think about fostering a child and prevent that vulnerability from kind of the very beginning. If you're a lawyer, maybe attend a coalition meeting and see if they could use some of your specialized help. And if you're connected to a church or a community service organization, I was at the coalition meeting this week and they said that the #1 issue that they're having in Pittsburgh right now is beds for these survivors. So if you're with an organization that could provide even short-term housing, that would be a huge help for them, especially when they have these victims and they're trying to build these trafficking cases against their exploiters. Care for those victims is hugely important. And of course, if you're working in this space already, if you work in foster care or social work, we'd love to talk to you. Please come talk to me or email me to find those kids who slip off the radar. So some kids just kind of slip off of the map, but not really for any explicitly bad reason, but they just kind of fall off. And we want to make sure that we're not missing those kids because we know that foster children and runaways are among the most vulnerable to human trafficking. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that they make up about 60% of underage victims. If you do street-level outreach with these groups, come talk to us. We want to know maybe what victims are we missing because they don't even show up online. And we don't have all the answers, so if you have any other ideas of how we could work together, we'd love to hear them. I've thought recently about the fact that if I had been born into a different situation, I could have ended up in a situation like Sarah. And I really believe that. And Sarah could be any one of our children or our sisters, and I think that that's how we should think of them. There are children in our community, so they need our help right now, and I think that we can all pull together and work on a solution. We want to give these children the opportunity to live and choose a free life. So please join with us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can continue to expand this work. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.